That's right. What's up, everybody?
I love that.
Welcome to our Voice Podcast, Neil and Desmond show. Neil, man, it's great to have you back, bro.
Back at you, man. I just love listening to that song.
Man, let me tell
the
you.
new school kind of hits me.
I know, but listen, I'm going to go ahead and say it here on a live podcast, man, that I really did miss you last show, man. I talked a lot of junk about you, but I missed you nevertheless.
Well, I appreciate that, and I know, giving each other grief is our love language, so I felt it.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Our Voice Podcast. You know what we are, the podcast that elevates the voices of people who are directly impacted by our justice system, that the voices of returning citizens are relevant, and while we appreciate all of our allies and supporters and friends that are very knowledgeable in certain areas, we know that we are subject matter experts and we do not have to be left out of the conversation anymore, and that's why we're here.
Oh, man, we got a good one today.
No, we don't.
No, we do, man. We're going to talk about words. We're going to talk about language. We're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about how all that plays into, transforming the way people see us, the way we see ourselves, the whole deal, man.
Well, that's I think speaks to the heart of what we do, right? I mean, because I remember you telling the story, and this, I know I might not get it all the way right, but I heard you a few times tell a story about, one time Desmond had me down in LaBelle, Florida, and we was talking about Amendment 4, and I never forget what he told me. He said, as long as people see us as human beings, we can win. And because I was asking him, where's our enemy? We have to have an enemy. I was like, nah, the goal is not to create an enemy. The goal is to humanize people with felony convictions, and if they can see us as human beings, then we can be successful in the campaign.
Come on, man. That moment changed me.
Yeah.
I like your impression. I was like, hey, that was good. But yeah, man, that's right? Because I know I was kind of having this like, we're talking about politics. We're talking about, current events. We're talking about all these other things. And you're like, no. What we're talking about is people. Right, and people-focused conversations and culture and policies.
Well, before we even move further along, I think you owe our listeners and our viewers some kind of explanation of why you played hooky on this, man. Well, what have you been up to?
Oh, man. Well,
where did we go? I mean, you traveling all over the world, right? To something?
Well, you know me. I got this passion for second chance employment, so I had the opportunity to sit in some spaces and learn a little bit and try and develop some new allies. So, man, it takes a lot to miss a podcast. So, I appreciate all the grief that I was given in my absence.
We sure missed you, man, for real. We had some guests on from Demos, and it was an amazing show. And I was like, man, this would have been perfect for Neil. Right? But at the end of the day, I had to, trudge along and, force my way through it, kind of carry all of the weight.
I was just going to say, it's nothing new for you in our relationship. You're carrying the anchor. I got you. I understand.
So anywhere else, did you go anywhere else?
Oh, I did go to the Aspen conference,
Oh, wait,
man.
you was at Aspen?
I know, where Marcus Bullock was.
Wait, you like... Aspen, that's like kind of like bougie.
Bougie indeed, man. I was like, I need to get some new clothes, man.
You didn't go skiing, did you?
No.
Wow.
But definitely learned a lot, man.
Yep,
so
and
grateful for the opportunity.
And you've seen some things there about narrative changes and all of that too as well?
No, definitely. Which really leads into this conversation about, right? Like you said in that story that you started, man, it's about how we see each other. And man, that getting that right or changing that helps us do all the other things we want to do.
Well, speaking of that, man, let me tell you once again, our production team, ZB Production, they have always consistently answered the challenge of making sure that they're bringing nothing but superstars on our show. And speaking of narrative change, we got a superstar in this narrative change with us, right?
Yeah, we do. I cannot wait to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to this ever since we talked to our guest. She is very active in an organization called Forward US, in which she works in criminal justice policies. And she came from Pew Charitable Trust, like Pew, that credible source that gives us great information. Time. That's real big time.
Wow.
Real big time.
Wait, so she left Pew.
Yep.
She left Pew at Pew to go to Forward. So she moved forward.
That's right.
Upgraded, and now she's doing what?
Yeah, she's helping to talk about people-centered campaigns, how we shift culture so that we can change policy. And why don't we just go ahead and introduce her, bring her on, and maybe you could tell.
Let's bring her.
This is Zoë Towns. Welcome to the Our Voice
What's
podcast.
up, Zoë?
Hello.
Hey.
What's going on?
Everything's going on. It's going well. It's so nice to be here with you two. I am big fans. I'm a big fan of podcasts. I'm a big fan of you both, work. So it's really delightful.
Well, we're big fans of you. I can tell you that, Zoë.
Yeah, you are the pinnacle of such important work. So I mean, can we maybe kind of jump in and maybe just go open it up? Like, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let's do it.
What drives you? How'd you get involved in the work?
Yeah, what is that passion that drives you into this type of work?
Oof. So small questions. Yeah. So I mean, what is the passion? I mean, you kind of said it. I mean, this is just, so at Forward in particular, we're really focused on ending mass incarceration, but that sort of focus for me started a long time ago. And, I always kind of grew up being told by my family and by my sort of the folks that I was surrounded with that it was kind of the sin we were all living with, was this system of mass incarceration. Of course, I'm sure there's many other ones, but certainly it was the one that kind of loomed for me. And, it traces a little bit through my family history and then found myself running a bail fund, found myself, getting that bail fund shut down by a really angry judge who didn't want people getting bailed out. And so realized we needed to change some laws to allow for bail funds in New York, and then kind of thought, wow, you can actually change these horrible laws. And so found myself getting really excited about campaigning and legislative campaigning. And that took me on a path to a lot of different states where I worked on legislative campaigns, a lot in the South, and also Oregon, Alaska, different places. And then ultimately ended up at the job that I'm in now, where we do a lot of that work, kind of like bipartisan political advocacy, legislative campaigning, and also a lot of narrative campaigns, like you all said, just trying to figure out what are the policy changes that we need, but also what are the conditions that we can help build to open up the space for more and more of these freedoms and wins that we just so desperately need. And so how do we find those arguments, or the data arguments, or storytelling, or frameworks that help to kind of collect more and more supporters and more community and help people see this stuff differently.
So Zoë, I listen, I want to back you up a little bit. I don't want you just
too much.
I don't want you to rush over some key things. You were in Alaska doing work? What?
Yeah, it's so far away. I mean, it's not far away if you're in Alaska, but it's far away if you're coming from DC. Well, so they were when was this? About a decade ago, and they were working to figure out how to reduce their incarcerated population. They, it's a small, comparably small number of people who are locked up, but it's pretty high incarceration rate. And so they were, and they have all these unique kind of really high, indigenous incarceration rate, first of all, and then also just these really fascinating and horrible dynamics with sort of people being very far away, because access to stuff is really difficult in Alaska. There's just, you got to take little puddle jumpers to get from town to town sometimes, and so that had unique kind of just uniquely punishing for families, I think. Anyway, so we worked with some task forces there, the governor, the chief justice, some Senate leaders, to try and work on a package of reforms.
Who was the governor then? Was it Sarah Palin?
No.
Why did you laugh? Wasn't she the governor of Alaska?
She was the governor of Alaska, yeah.
So were you there before she was the governor, or after she was the governor?
I was there after, with Governor Walker.
Okay.
Although, let me just tell you that this is going to sound potentially really problematic, and now I'm sad that I started telling this story, but when I got to Alaska, I was a little bit okay, but we are actually very close to Russia. Like, I was a little bit like, listen, I know that people made a lot of fun of her, but we are legitimately very close to Russia. So I'll just say that. But
so a little Tina Fey shout out. Is that what we're talking? SNL skit here? Is that, I like it.
No, but yeah, there's like a really kind of interesting, independent political dynamic and libertarian Republican crew there that was pretty organized around making things different for a while. So I spent some time there, about a year, flying back and forth.
So here's a question for you, right? Being that you were so close to Russia, right? So you have Russia and you have Alaska.
I'm gonna regret that.
Which part? Yeah. The part of the U.S. Whose incarceration rates was worse or highest?
Ooh, is this a quiz?
Yeah.
No. Yikes. Probably Alaska? I don't know. This is stressful.
At a minimum, definitely the United States.
Yeah, definitely United States, right?
Definitely the United States. I got that. I got that for sure. But I'm gonna get back to you.
Even though you were living next to Russia, right? A person was more in danger of being incarcerated living in Alaska than living in Russia.
Right.
It's a wild thing to think about, right?
We're the land of the free.
Yep. Okay. And I'll tell you, because we'll talk about this hopefully in a little bit, but they ushered through this really comprehensive series of reforms. I want to say, now my memory is failing me, but I want to say it was Senate Bill 91, maybe. It was pretrial reforms and sentencing reforms and not just, reforms that impacted folks with nonviolent convictions, but some of the more serious offenses, dropping all those terms, really ambitious, bold, evidence-based, smart reforms. And they pass it all, the population starts dropping really rapidly, and then people just start writing these stories, these sort of listservs crop up, nasty, fear-mongery kind of, narratives start cropping up, and within a few years, they roll back a ton of it. And so really? I just, when you talk about what has driven me in my more recent career, I spent a lot of time working on these legislative campaigns, kind of trying to build coalition, build support for these reforms, and where you build well, you can sort of hold on to a lot, but when you're not sort of building in ways that are prepared for this, and not that you can protect against it always, but there's freedom's met with backlash, it's met with retaliation almost every time in the history of this country, and I'm sure other ones as well. And trying to figure out what are the real transformations and conversions that we have to endure and create conditions for that can hold on to these policy wins, I think has got to be a project that we give equal amounts of attention to kind of the writing of bills and the lobbying and stuff like that, because one kind of reporter or one news station or one political campaign that says oh, here's some free political capital, I can just freak people out by retail shoplifting stories or whatever it might be, and you lose all this freedom. So
let's look at this in context with what you're working on now. Could you just share with our viewers about what was the People First campaign?
Yeah. So People First. So first of all, I should say that this is a decades long, if not longer than that, campaign to try to use dignified and sort of humane terminology when we're talking about people who are oppressed by systems, right? That the language we use is gonna, I believe, and I think that we can now prove with a lot of data is gonna actually sort of open up space for what's possible and kind of holding people in those systems or outside of those systems, or really contract sort of the possibilities. And so when it comes to this particular campaign, we were looking at all of the efforts for the last several decades, beginning, I would say probably with Eddie Ellis and certainly many other people who said, okay, hold on, we are, convicted or incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people who are pathways to opportunity and thriving are interrupted by the language that you're using when you're calling us words like inmate and convict and felon. Just those words, if plenty more is interrupting, but just those words alone are making it harder for me to achieve the freedoms that I need and deserve. And so we read a lot about this. We had a lot of friends and colleagues who had really advance these arguments, whether it's, the great work that you've all done, the great work that folks have done at Vote, the great work, from places like Vera to Advancement Project, all these different organizations over the years had said, like, hold on, let's use better language here. And we kind of felt like what would be helpful here in terms of bringing a new argument. And we decided to try to build a research project that would sort of offer some more demonstration, more proof that the words themselves were biasing, were not neutral. Because a lot of what we would hear, whenever, I don't know, Desmond, were you at the, must have been at the town hall, the voter town hall in 2020, what was it, 2019, 2020? At Eastern Penitentiary?
Well, actually, I wasn't there, but we had one of our representatives, Angel Sanchez, was there.
Okay.
And that was an historic, for our viewers, that was an historic moment. And that was when the formerly incarcerated, convicted people, family members movement, a bunch of people who've been justice impacted actually held a forum there, and several presidential candidates came, and it was actually held in a former prison that was turned into a museum. So that was a historic moment.
It was such a beautiful. It was so beautiful. Talk about taking the narrative and setting the conversation on the terms of it. It was so it was so good. And there was a reporter there who was, identified by the event coordinators as sort of like more friendly, invited to come and help moderate the debate the whatever it was, like the town hall with the candidates who came. And at one point, I think he's questioning Tom Steyer maybe. And he asks a question, and he says something about inmate, and the whole audience starts booing him. And the journalist gets really, really kind of like aggravated and like triggered, and is like, I'm just using the neutral term. I'm a journalist. And everyone just keeps booing him. And I think it's such a good example, because I've been on the phone call, on phone calls with, or like in meetings with a bunch of editorial boards and reporters over the years, and been like, hey, can you please use better language? Like, you don't need to be talking about this convict that, or this felon this, or whatever. And I constantly heard like, okay, you're an advocate, whatever, lady, you can use your pretty language. I'm going to use the neutral term, the system term. And so we said, okay, well, go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm saying, haven't those terms been like normalized, to where, folks are not necessarily looking at those terms as negative terms, right?
Right. I think we think that. Like, we think like, well, this is just the term that you're supposed to use. And so we decided to design a survey. We did a national survey, and we did two of them. So we did two national surveys to try and check our data. We did it with Venison Strategy Group, this big polling firm. And we asked people a whole bunch of questions. We basically like gave them mock headlines that were kind of like the same stories, but we would just use like dehumanizing language, like, inmate, convict, felon. And then we would use the people first alternative, like, people in prison or person in prison. And we asked people to tell us like, whether they, after they read those stories based on the language, were they empathetic with the people discussed, or and did they support reforms that would impact them? And 75% of the people who read these stories with the dehumanizing language, were less likely to support reform, or support the people who were talked about than if they use the other language. And then we just sort of did another experiment. We said, okay, so we're going to say words like felon, like, inmate, like convict, and you just tell us what you hear, what you think. And they did an open-ended kind of, an open-ended qualitative experiment with them. And they would say, dark, scary, urban, right? Like all these coded words, right? Unsafe, and then you would just say, felon, they would give you those. And then you say person with a felony conviction, the exact same meaning, right? And they would just, and they would just give you a whole span of words, some negative, some positive, but it would just go right down the middle, like, kind of neutral word. And so we were kind of trying to show to reporters and to other people, like, listen, you've already heard these words are hurtful from the people who are most impacted by them. That wasn't enough for you. You've been telling us that they're just like the unbiased terminology. They're not. You're actually, when you use them, you are actually biasing your audiences against the people and against the reforms that could free or, empower them. So like, what's up? Why can't we,
So here's the question. Is it the reporters that you feel is pushing these words? And did these words originate with the reporters? Or are the reporters just mimicking or reflecting the words that society has developed or adopted?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think for us, we're like very interested right now in the responsibility of journalists. And so it's not that like they're more like, it's not that like, you know, the government, that you could do a whole campaign and we should, you know, trying to push government. You could do a whole campaign trying to put, this is stuff that like, one of the things about People First campaign is that, you know, we started talking about media and the responsibility of reporters to be careful with the words that they chose. But you can take this campaign and take it to your dinner table, right? Like mom, dad, like, whoa, like maybe not with those words. Like, let's talk about people as humans. Well, and you can take it to your teachers or whatever, right? We're all responsible.
And what I hear, Zoe, when you're talking about that is like, you're talking about getting into the bloodstream of the culture, right? Like wherever we are, whoever we're talking to, language matters, right? And I see a connection between your work in Alaska and this work, because when you start talking about people's freedom and then it getting rolled back, right? The way we hold it is we've got to change the culture. Right. Or we're just going to be at the whim of, you know, whatever the latest and greatest, you know, kind of attack ad is, or, you know, however somebody wants to leverage public opinion.
You know, one of the things when we started right before we launched the campaign, Amendment 4 campaign, as we were building out FRC and we were planning on hosting rallies throughout the state of Florida, and someone just out of the clear blue sent me a study that was done by the criminology doctoral program at Florida State University. And it was titled Labeling, right? And in that study, what it said was that when you call someone a convict or a felon, right, that you actually increase the likelihood of them recidivating, right? And how, you know, that what that did was that it triggered this saying that I always used to hear, around parenting, when they're saying that if you keep calling your children stupid, they're gonna grow up believing that they are. You think they're gonna stupid, think?
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And so we struggled for quite some time to try to figure out, okay, we don't want to use felon, we don't want to use convict. What word can we use? And I mean, we tossed and turned for quite some time, and we came up with the word or the phrase "returning citizens," right? Really to try to humanize. And that was our origin story of the use of that word. And maybe about a year or two later, my wife seen it. She was like, I hope you don't think that you invented that word, because there's some folks in D.C. that uses that terminology. And that's when I discovered that in D.C., in the D.C. area, they have even the Office of Returning Citizens, right?
Right.
But even back then, no, we realized the power of words, but no, I never thought about launching a campaign, right, to really try to like humanize people like that. And so I'm pretty sure. Is that report something that's publicly available?
Yes, it is. If anyone goes to fwd.us/people first, they'll find their way to it.
That's what's up, man.
That is what's up. I mean, I think of like when we were working on the campaign, right? Like all the different nuances around language. So, for instance, when we were trying to communicate about, you know, what the amendment did, it restored the ability to vote for people. We realized that half of the Florida population thinks that voting's a right, and half the population thinks voting's a privilege. And what we saw was, we are starting to see people fight about that rather than fighting to end this 150-year Jim Crow policy. And so we really needed to be disciplined around, like, we're going to use the word ability to vote. You know, so it's like, I find this topic so fascinating and so important, because you can get deeper than the current politics. Real deep. Set us up for
right. Like, how do you find a way in, right? Yeah. So we did, and one of the things we found that I thought was super interesting is like when you ran, when you ask people, like, you know, different questions and you change the words from people first words to more dehumanizing language, some of the population that was dragging those kind of biases the most in the polling was an age group of people over 50. That was the most, like, the thing that was most likely to impact your view, or like the way the population that was most likely to be impacted by what words were used were people over 50. And that's a population that is more likely to be white, more likely to be conservative, more likely to be, are people who are in kind of power of creating, justice reform policies, whether it's like judges or state, lawmakers or members of Congress. These are people that are disproportionately over 50, right? And so just in terms of like as advocates or as campaigners, when we go out into the world and we're using our own, we're using the language and the arguments, just understanding how important that language is, because oftentimes the people who are most influential in that lawmaking are the most likely to kind of be impacted by whether you use people first language or not. And interestingly, they were the least likely to think that they were impacted. So like when you ask young people, do you think this terminology matters? They would say like, oh, it totally matters. Like you have to use good language. And when you ask older people, they would say like, oh, it won't impact. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what language you choose, but it actually was impacting them more because they just like weren't aware of how much language was impacting them.
So Zoe, let me ask you, the study looked at how people reacted to that language, right? But did you guys look at how that language directly impacted people?
It's a super good question. We did not, and we've talked a lot. So, Norris Henderson, who I know you are both good friends with, was on our advisory board, and we talked about what it would mean to do more studies to think about, the ways in which it's language is impacting people who themselves are directly impacted by either convictions or incarceration, and kind of how to fashion those questions a little bit differently. Because I think one of the dynamics that I think he brought up is just sort of like, there are some people at least who have claimed this language for whatever reclaimed this language for whatever reason. And oftentimes, whether it's people who are not oppressed by these systems, and I've heard reporters say this, and also others will say like, oh, I asked the person, they said inmate's fine, right? and so kind of like trying to figure out how to weave through that to say like, listen, we should all know by now that like, people who are oppressed are whether or not they are able to, they want to reclaim language for their own to get some power back is their business, right? Like with privilege, your opportunity is to use the better language, right? But that can't be a permission structure, right? For us to fall back into worse language. But it would be super interesting to try to unpack and build questions that give space for that nuance. Because I wouldn't want to like make it too simple. I think that there's some good arguments there in terms of just reclaiming the language for your own or for different reasons.
Let me tell you, I got to say this one right, because that story reminds me like, that was a poor example, because it's like Neil would be like, well, hey, listen, I'll talk to Desmond and he's okay with me using the N-word, so I should be able to use the N-word, right? That reasoning that reporter had, I think it fails. It really does.
It certainly does fail.
Yeah.
Could you imagine saying that, Neil?
No, I can't. I got nervous just when you said it right there.
Oh, Jesus. So, he's red right now, Zoe.
So Zoe, I'm intrigued with, so you're saying that some of the people most impacted by the language change, kind of older folks over 50, what I see is that sometimes trying to kind of have a conversation about different language with that same group can kind of result in like a PC pushback, right? Where it's almost like it becomes a little bit more about like, oh, hey, what are you, some bedwetting liberal or something trying to tell me what to say, as opposed to actually having a conversation about what language we as individual people should use. Do you have like some tools or some experience in terms of how to kind of break through that to get to the heart of the matter and not necessarily get caught up in kind of an anti-PC simple conversation?
Right. I mean, honestly, that was one of the reasons why we were trying to prove bias, because, we felt like people were sort of petting us on the head and sort of being like, oh, they're there, like stop being a snowflake. It doesn't matter what words we use. And so we tried to sort of bring some facts and figures to it. But also, Neil, I think that like one of the things that my takeaways from this study and the broader campaign is that there's the question of having a conversation with an individual and saying like, hey, we don't say that or whatever. And there's the question of just like, we're out here, we are communicators, you all are communicators and campaigners, and as am I. And so there's also just the question of what language we decide to use ourselves when we're doing things like commercials or billboards or talking to journalists who then have a whole broad, massive audience, or talking on TV. And just the very fact that, like, if you engage with like criminal justice reform kind of content these days, it sounds really different than it did, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because I think a lot of the communicators have gotten a lot better and a lot more diligent about using better, more sort of humane terminology. And I'll just tell you kind of a counter story to the Alaska one. And that's, in Oklahoma, I think you guys are aware that in 2019, there was a commutation kind of push. Well, it really began the year before. We were involved with a bunch of partners on the ground trying to push then Governor Felon to advance commutations, which had, beforehand really been reserved for kind of like the politically connected, right? But trying to like normalize commutation as something that everybody should have access to. Then she gets, there's a new governor, Governor Stitt, and he helps, sort of gets on board with the cause as well. And we push through legislation that kind of allows for this like big massive mass commutation. And it was the single largest commutation in one day. It's in November 2019. Over 500 folks come home. And the reporting on that, in large part because of the campaign that we were, a part of with a bunch of so many excellent partners from the right and the left and faith and business leaders and all kinds of folks, we're kind of holding that campaign in such a way that it was sort of like this moment, which like maybe 10 years ago would be like, oh my God, mass release of convicts. Instead was like, oh my God, what an incredible homecoming day, right? Wow. And that story gets put on. It gets put on Fox News. It gets put on Breitbart positively. It gets put on Mother Jones positively. It makes like, literally thousands of news hits, all kind of positive. And so then several years later, you've got somebody trying to give Governor Stitt a rough time in his primary, which I think he just won. Oh, I hope I don't have that wrong. Anyway, he did, right? Yeah. So they spend over $1 million talking about the commutation campaign and how, terrible it was, let out criminals, so dangerous, ruined Oklahoma. And we put a poll in the field to sort of say like, hey, is this ad working at all? Like, we were pretty stressed about it, not because we have a position organizationally on Governor Stitt being governor or not, but because we have a position on, protecting the freedoms that were gained through that commutation and more broadly. And so we do this poll and we show them the video, the kind of the ad that's got all this money behind it. And we ask people in Oklahoma, do you support the mass commutations in 2019? Over 85%. Wow. And like, I think you said that point, Neil, that like, how are you sort of engaging with culture and cultural change? And like, that was not some like backdoor private, nobody really knew what was going on, reform. That was like a front and center, like no one's hiding. We're all talking about it. Pictures of moms coming home, hugging their children, right? Like it was like it came into the kind of the cultural bloodstream. And it was the words that were used were sisters, mothers, dads, husbands, right? It was a different kind of very similar to the incredible work that you all did, obviously, in Florida, where it's just, you're talking about people, right? And so it just, not that it's going to be not going to be a fight, not that like, rollback attempts won't be attempted, but just that like how much harder it is for people to undo that when you've actually really kind of engaged in a genuine conversion of people, right? A genuine kind of transformation of people.
And think about what you're saying. I mean, I remember that, and man, kudos to y'all. Like that was game changer kind of stuff, right? Where you set the table. And then you've got somebody who makes a historic, amount of commutations, gets the kind of framing that you're talking about, in which people are focused on human beings coming home, and then boom, this guy gets a primary, right? He's a Republican governor, and he's got somebody running in the primary against him on these issues, and man, he won overwhelmingly. So to your point, it's like when we get this kind of how we see the world locked in, with the human first or people first mentality, what's possible is just, it just gets me excited.
And that was, one of the questions that I was thinking about, right, when Zoe was talking earlier, right, because with this new push about rising crime, right, how does that impact the work that, like Zoe's doing? How and evidently, I mean, it didn't have that much impact in that race because this was a recent race, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. And Oklahoma just passed clean slate laws, right? Record clearing laws. That governor is still moving forward.
So, do you see challenges in this new narrative about the rising crime?
I mean, yes, I certainly see challenges. I think, like, I'd be curious what you both think. I mean, I think that, like, as it compares to, like, I think if this had happened a decade ago, this increase in crime, I think we would be in a much trickier place. So, like, I both see it as, like, a genuine, we're in rougher waters than we've been in quite a few years as it relates to, like, public opinion and the narratives around crime and safety and justice, and also that we're in, for in spite of it all, there's just been so much sort of infrastructure built in this movement and mass incarceration and mass criminalization, and it's been such enormous strides been made, and kind of the coalitions and the partners that are on board and are already out on the record and out in support, that, like, there's just far more that there's a lot to protect, basically, right? Like, and I was looking recently at the, because if you look at the, if you're trying to, like, pull from, today versus maybe, 2 years ago, maybe you'll see a little bit of a little bit of dips, although, like, you're still seeing people. We just put a poll, as I said, in Oklahoma and Mississippi and New York, really different places in DC. And you're seeing people support these policies, policies that would safely and significantly reduce incarceration in well above 50, like in 60s and 70s, sometimes even in the 80s. Yeah. And so it's not that we're flailing. It is that there is, like, a unique kind of, or not unique, but a kind of a recent uptick in I think tension and fear that's obviously been really manipulated by a lot of politicians and a lot of media. But I think that, like, Desmond, that if you look across the larger term, like, just knowing that, like, if you look at polling from, like, 20 years ago, Gallup does this poll on, do you think that that we should be tougher on crime, or are we punitive enough, right? Those numbers have just been coming, like, the support over 20 years is just dramatically increased, or sorry, the people that are saying that we need to be more tough has massively decreased over time, right? So even if you see little blips along the way more recently, in terms, we're talking about a massive sort of change in how Americans have untangled mass incarceration from crime, and have said, like, we want safety, we also want to end mass incarceration, and we believe we can have both those things, right?
Well, let me tell you a brief story, because and you triggered it when you talked about these politicians trying to stroke up fear with what's going on now. I was reminded of, and I tell this story often when a good friend of mine, Dr. Vincent Ntandi, wrote a book about African Americans and the atomic bomb, right? And it was a book that talked about African Americans' community response to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was a piece in that book that really stuck with me, and it was about how prior to dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the United States had to engage in a massive propaganda campaign, right? And they stoked fear in folks, and they, like, depicted the Japanese people as evil, violent. I mean, even the caricatures of Japanese people were exaggerated. They had fangs and things of that nature. So people are thinking, oh my God, the Japanese people are going to come to kill us and invade our villages and burn down our homes and all this kind of stuff, right? And what I seen happen there, Zoe, was, the ability through propaganda campaign, through a narrative, through words, was able to stoke fear up in the people. And I think it did two things at once. Number one, it dehumanized the Japanese people. And number two, it desensitized us as to their humanity, right? And I think that the United States did such an amazing job that when they did, in fact, drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and murdered innocent women, children, and men, right, that rather than there be a more outrage, right, that it was actually a huge public celebration, right, that people celebrated the slaughtering of innocent women, children, and men. right? And that was the impact of a propaganda campaign. And I equate that to the same narrative that created words like super predators and convicts and cons, and it allowed people who were caught up in the criminal legal system to be dehumanized, and it allowed the public to be sensitized as to their humanity. So no one is caring about children being thrown in cages that really not even fit for animals. No one is caring about little kids being thrown in solitary confinement, or human beings being put in solitary confinement, not for days but for months and years, right? And there was very little compassion, because we have to be tough on those criminals, right? And so it allowed the perpetrators to actually engage in dehumanizing activities, and it also allowed the public to not care, to turn the other way, right? And so there is that power that's there, right? And I do believe that the campaign that you're working on, this People First campaign, is the most important campaign as it relates to criminal justice reform, right? I would even lift it up higher, right, than bail reform. I would lift it up higher than even decarceration policy, because I believe that if the narrative has not changed, no matter what wins we get, right, we would lose those wins, right, when a politician comes along and strokes up fear in people. Right,
because fear plus dehumanization leads to
we're rolling back those policies. Those policies are getting rolled back.
Yeah, I think we, to the extent that we are like holding on to as much as we are in this moment, where is because of all the work that so many people have done over the course of the last several decades to humanize the people that are in this. Trapped inside the system, right? Like even just, we did, for a long time, it was, there was kind of breaking news, like 1 in 100 Americans are behind bars in 2007. And then, over 70 million with convictions. And then more recently, we did this survey in whatever it was, 2018, I think, to see like, okay, how many folks have had a direct family member who are impacted by incarceration? Oh, 1 in 2, right? So like 100. So now all of a sudden it's like,
that's right.
Jesus,
getting closer and closer and closer. And I think that, that's just one example, but like there's been so many, arguments and stories and movies and campaigns that have helped Americans kind of come out of hiding on this question that has actually been impacting literally 1 in 2 of us. If you're Black, 2 and 3, if you're poor from the South, even higher. And so people are kind of like, wait, those are my people. That's me, or those are my people, in a way that like we weren't kind of given the permission structure to do that maybe a couple decades ago.
Well, I think that helps. I really do think that helps, and I'm gonna tell you why, right? Because when you're I remember I was on a panel with someone, and they was talking about juvenile justice reform, right? And they was asking, well, Desmond, what kind of policy changes would you recommend, Desmond? And I was like, listen, I'm not a juvenile justice reform expert, but what I can tell you is a good place to start. And the best place to start when you're thinking about possible reform issues was to think about what would you want to happen if that was your son that did something at the school. And so I believe that when people they just respond differently, even with the campaign. It wasn't about, when them 5.1 million people were voting, they wasn't voting to free Desmond, they were voting to free someone who they love.
And
right?
So that's exactly what I was thinking about when you were talking, was this moment, because people would ask like, hey, well, when did you know that Amendment 4 was going to pass? And for me, it was really beginning to hear the storyline develop in the way in which folks were talking about their loved ones, right? We didn't hear people saying, hey, I'm going to go vote for that party or that governor candidate. We heard people say, I'm going to go vote for my loved one who lives up the street. I'm going to go vote for my aunt who's incarcerated. I'm going to vote for, and once you began to see that, then you saw, Desmond, when he kicked off this campaign, right, everybody who was anybody who knew everything said you couldn't do what happened in November 2018. You can't come talk about crime and race and voting and get 60% of the vote in Florida. But the only way you could do it is to connect people with their loved ones. And see this as a movement around love and around making lives better for real people, not the other stuff.
And that's why that People First campaign, I think, is just so tremendous, right? Because when you start getting, because here's the thing, right? Because it changes how you even respond to crime. Right? It changes how you respond to someone, say, breaking a law, right? Because if it's not someone who I care about or if not someone who I know, right, the response could be different, right? But when you start bringing folks in the proximity of the issue, then their responses is going to be, less of a retributive or I should say retributive type of response, right? And a more of a healing type of response. Yeah, my son does something wrong.
Because safety for who, right? Like if you're concerned with safety for everyone, then incarceration doesn't literally work. It doesn't make sense, right? Like if you're, conviction bars and no housing, it doesn't make sense. That's not safety.
If you're concerned about safety, then you're not going to have violent and nonviolent designations dictate policies around reentry. You're not. It doesn't make sense, right? Because every common sense says that if a person is able to successfully reintegrate, that they won't reoffend, right? That if they're able to get a job, safe and affordable housing, if they're able to get education, if they're able to vote, right, that they can have a higher chances of successfully reintegrating. And so why would you now say, okay, well, yeah, we want reentry policies, but only for nonviolent offenders? Really, that doesn't make sense because guess what? 95% of people that are incarcerated, right, they're coming out, whether it's so violent or not. And so we don't. It's
like I'd be curious if you've had similar experiences, right? Where it's like, when we started kind of really pushing around these second chance employment policies. I'm talking about conversations with allies, people who are like, hey, we're with you. We want to change things, and suddenly it's like you're talking about a proposal, for instance, to change the job licensing situation in Florida, and people are like, well, sure, why don't we just wait 10 years before somebody can get a license? And to Dez's point, it's like, well, wait a minute, I don't know that you're looking at this right? Are we looking about this from a lens of public safety? Are we looking about this from the lens of like, who's responsible for punishment? You're a staff person in the legislature, and you've decided to continue to punish somebody. I thought that's what the judge did. And so that's why it feels like so many of these things are deeper, right? And they're upstream on the policies we want to change. But if we don't get these right, then it becomes super easy to suddenly see the rollback, right? We all want to like wave at the flag, the bill passed, and really the hard work begins when the bill passes, right?
I think that's right. And I think that holding our lawmakers accountable is a different project when you're kind of saying, when you're saying this is impacting all of us, right? Like this is actually our problem, our families, our communities. It feels different than it's sort of like a kind of like a project that you're doing to like help some other community, right? If we're holding these people close and acknowledging how much we are all impacted, then it becomes a different project in terms of holding politicians accountable. If they can successfully, I don't just plenty of politicians who are wonderful, but like I don't know many.
What I do know are public servants who are wonderful.
That's
I know for public service.
It's always been really cheap and easy kind of political capital to just other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even other people, if no one's looking out for the whoever, make an other and then make sure no one's looking out for them. They've got no protections, and then build policies that like make things worse for them, that make it easier for you to build power or get elected, whatever it might be. But like if we start to just be really careful and diligent and like, whoa, that's my community. Those are my people. That's my brother. That's my whoever.
Yeah.
It gets a lot more tricky. Look at with the immigrant issue, right? Situation.
Right. All they had to do was put one word in front of immigrant, right? And it changes the whole dynamics, right? And how much people care, to empathize or whatever. Just put the word illegal. That's it. Illegal.
Yep.
That was it. Right? And so how do we, continue to remove those and understand that, first of all, I mean, because listen, how could you be anti-immigration, right? Living in a country
built on immigration,
right? That didn't make sense, right?
But you're right. It's like the challenge of dehumanization is to see it, right? Because it's like, at least, and I'm not a social scientist, but I believe it that people's we all have a propensity to dehumanize, and it comes from the challenge of seeing people hurting, seeing people in a bad right. Like you want to all of a sudden distance yourself from that because it's easier to process sometimes. So you say the word illegal, and suddenly it's like, oh, I actually don't have to worry about that anymore. But, right? And it's amazing how that works.
Hey, so Zoe, check this out. I got to ask this question. I don't know why. I'm just being led to ask this question.
Ooh, this will be good. Come on.
If you had to choose, right, a side in a contest, right, between Michigan State Wolverines and Ohio State Buckeyes, who would you pick to win?
Listen. I want no part of this.
Come on, Zoe. Who would you want to win?
She is a good part.
Let's see.
Don't try and get me in the middle of this drama.
Come on, Zoe. You have to make a choice. You have to vote.
When
you don't vote,
I want them both to win.
Nice.
But they can't. They can't. No. You have to pick one, Zoe.
I cannot believe
Come
you're
on,
putting her
Zoe.
in this
Come
position,
through on this.
Desmond.
Come through on this.
This is his way of like trying to teach me, Zoe, because the only people I dehumanize are Michigan fans, and I realize I have issues and I have work to do, and so I think this is Desmond's way of. We are all on this journey together. I know that they're good people. I hope that. I hope that.
Zoe.
She's not answered. Did you see that?
The M or the O?
Oh, man. She's,
there's no M in your name whatsoever.
He thinks he can wait me out, but he's not gonna.
We're gonna run out of time.
No, Zoe is a proven
clock out.
So I think what it is. She's an Ohio State fan. She would pick Ohio State, but she don't want to say it to hurt my feelings. Well, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, she's empathetic. I understand that.
Yeah. So we're gonna put a check next to Ohio State for you. All right. See, when you don't vote, others vote for you, right? And they make decisions for you, Zoe. That's why we say let our people vote.
So for real, Zoe, though, that question of like the moment, do you see it? It's really cool. Everything from Alaska, then we're in Oklahoma, knowing about your bail work in New York, and even kind of the journey of bail in New York. Like, do you see a couple things popping right now in different places across the country that you're gravitating to? Because we're just big fans of your work and love how you show up in spaces and get the kind of the deeper meaning of what we're all trying to do here. I'm curious if there's some places you could point to us.
I wish I was there with you all, because I think, I could feel
we need help in Florida. We need all the help we can get in Florida.
No, but there was something pretty magical, I think, that you all were a part of down there that we're still benefiting from. I think this was not lost on you all, but these campaigns, when you build right, they bleed out into so many different places. So you have, the win that you all advanced. And then 4 years later, I was looking at the policy platform for the Democratic Party, and I had to read it 20 times. So I thought I was blind. It said, reenfranchise people with felony convictions. And I thought, oh my God, this Democratic Party, this United States Democratic Party, what are they talking about?
Let me tell you, I got to interject because it's something I'm even more proud of, right, really, is that when you look at the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, when you look at the biggest gains in expanding democracy, guess what the common denominator is? That at the center of it was somebody directly impacted. We had Norris Henderson in Louisiana. Right. You had Darrell Atkinson in North Carolina. You had people like Dorsey Nunn and Susan Burton and Taina Vargas in California. Yeah. Right? Those were some
like Tara through the legislature in Washington,
becoming a state legislature. And so what we see was that the biggest expansion of democracy in this country over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, right, have been led by people who've been closest to the pain. That to me is like amazing. And then of course, I work in Florida, 1.4 million.
Yeah, when I think of what you do, Zoe, like part of it also is I just think there's something about the way you show up and you talk to people that are going to communicate this in a way that's way more personal, way more human first, people first, than simply
Zoe got it.
Sounding
Zoe
like people arguing about Ohio State, Michigan.
Forward FWD.US. FWD.US. Listen, if you haven't visited that site, please make sure you go visit that site, man. There's tons of good info in there, and really, it's an important. That People First campaign is extremely important because when we're able to look at each other as human beings, we're able to, matter of fact, remember what I said was that one of the major goals, right, of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, right, is to get the world or get society to fight for the least among us, for those who have been most weakened. And we believe that if we can get people to love the most despised in our society, if we have the capabilities of loving the most despised, then we can love everybody.
That's a society.
Everybody.
Right there, yeah.
And it starts with how do we humanize even the worst, right? The person who you might think is the worst, first recognizing that, man, that's another human being, right? Not some monster no, that's another human being. That's somebody's son, brother, sister, mom, right? That's me.
That's right.
But for the grace of, what did it say? But for the grace of God, there go I, right? And so, really, Zoe, we're out of time, but I really, 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 Zoe, really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think it is so critical and necessary for all of the other works that's going on. And I just want to take this moment to say thank you.
Yeah, and I'd love to
so
double down on that. Thank you so much for your leadership. It shows what's possible, and just keep being the badass that you are.
Yeah. Even though you wouldn't pick Michigan.
So much. Happy almost 10-year anniversary for you all.
Yes, excited. We got the 10-year. That's great. 10 years coming up. Yep, that's right.
What are you, a professional communicator? That's fantastic. Wow.
I love it.
I love it. Yeah, thank you.
Good plug, Zoe. Once again, thank you so much. You've been great. Thank you for just putting up with me and Neil and some of my shenanigans as well. We love your work. We love the organization. Make sure everybody you check out FWD.US, forward US. Got it going on.
That's right. Thanks, Zoe.